My Uncle Ned took my hand. "Thank you for coming, Silas," he said. I was fighting hard to hold back my tears. Ned was my last living relative, and he was dying. Minutes before, his physician had delivered the news to me in the small lobby at the end of the intensive care unit. Uncle Ned and I had always been close. He was my mother's brother and like a second father to me. 2 years before, as I had watched my mother's coffin being lowered into her grave, Ned had put his arm around me and said, "She is in a better place, son." Now it was just Ned and me, and he knew it was his turn. Since he had been taken sick, I had come to the hospital every day. He thought I was coming for his sake, but I realized now I was coming for my own. Today, he had the doctor call and say that I needed to go early, as it was urgent that I speak to him. "I was coming anyway. I'll just come a bit early," I said. When I arrived, Ned said, "I need to talk to you about the egg money," in a voice that was getting weaker. The egg money was kind of a family legend. It began with my great-grandfather Silas, my namesake, whose father had been a lawyer. But Silas wanted to be a farmer. His father was opposed, but young Silas had been keeping chickens behind the well-to-do family's house. This was a bit of an embarrassment to the affluent family. Silas sold the eggs and saved the money. When Silas was 20, his father put his foot down and said that he'd had enough of the chickens. If Silas refused to enter what his father considered a suitable profession, then he would be cut off from the family's wealth. What his father did not know was that Silas had made considerable money from the sale of eggs. Silas left home and set himself up on a farm. He prospered greatly in this endeavor, to the point that he reconciled with his family. After going out on his own, Silas always set aside the egg money in a special fund. He eventually gave this money to my grandfather as a kind of trust for future generations of the family. My grandfather had 2 children, my mother Sonia and my Uncle Ned, to whom he entrusted the egg money, as it was called. Anytime there was a financial problem in the family, my mother and Uncle Ned would say, "Let's tap the egg money," and then they would laugh hysterically. Perhaps it was because of the laughter that I saw the egg money as a kind of joke. Ned was a lawyer like his grandfather, Silas's father. Still, Ned always lived very frugally in a small house with very modest needs. He had never married, often saying that he would marry when he found a woman as good as his mother or his sister, but I guess he never did. "Uncle, if there is nothing in the egg fund, I do not care. I am here for you, not money," I said. "I know that, and that is why I called you. Next month you will marry Nancy, and, well, as good as she seems and as pretty as she is, there is something there I just cannot trust. It is said that you do not know your spouse until you have been married for a long time," Ned said, and then paused before continuing. "On my desk at home, you will find my will and all the information on the Silas Stevenson Family Trust. Please do not tell your wife about it until you are completely sure of her and have been married for at least 5 years. Promise me this, and I will go to my eternal rest in peace." What could I do? I made my uncle the promise he sought. It was, I believed, a small, unimportant matter. I was to be proved very wrong. I stayed another hour with my uncle. During that time, he seemed to go to sleep, but then monitors beeped and buzzed. My Uncle Ned was gone to join my mother and his. 3 days later, I buried my uncle in the family plot next to my mom and dad. Their parents were there, as was the entire family in the little cemetery outside of Messina. Nancy, my fiancée, did not make the funeral. She had final exams. Nancy was then a 4th-year medical student. Nancy and I had been together for about 2 years. She and Uncle Ned had never clicked. Nancy can be a bit off-putting. She is a very driven person. From high school on, she had been focused on becoming a doctor. She made every sacrifice called for. It left her a bit socially stunted. She is a pretty woman. Some might even say beautiful, at 5'6" with shoulder-length blonde hair. She had the figure of a cheerleader, but the personality of a computer geek. She was not the best at math, which is how we met. In college, I was a tutor for those challenged by calculus. Nancy was assigned to me. She needed good grades to get into med school, and that meant not just passing calculus but doing very well. Somehow, we just seemed to connect. My ambition was to teach. We were both dedicated to helping others. Neither of us had much relationship experience. We started what I would call study dating. We would get together to study and end up at the coffee shop. Gradually, we began necking on the way home. On the night I got the news of my mother's death, I was with Nancy. The following day, I asked her to marry me, but we put off the nuptials until I graduated and found a teaching job. A week after Ned's funeral, I opened the drawer of my uncle's desk and discovered he had left me a great burden. There, neatly laid out, were his last testament and the records of a trust to which I was the sole beneficiary. The monthly statements of banks and brokers said it all. The Stevenson Family Trust contained almost $7 million. Nancy and I had been living together for several years while she completed school. I obtained my teaching certificate and the wedding was planned for the following month. I would be supporting us on my teacher's salary while she completed her degree. She still had a long road ahead, as she wished to become a surgeon. The money I had inherited would make life easier, but I had promised to keep it a secret. I also saw the egg money as a kind of personal obligation, something to be handed down to our children. I didn't tell Nancy about the trust fund and instead took the money to an investment firm in Manhattan. If we needed something, I would dip into the funds, always making it seem like I had borrowed the money and was struggling to pay it back. In a way, that was true. I intended to repay the trust as best I could. Her parents threw us a fine wedding, but I refused their offer to pay for a honeymoon. I took us to an expensive Caribbean resort, telling Nancy that Uncle Ned had left me a bequest for our honeymoon. And that was the truth. During those first few years of our marriage, I saw very little of Nancy. It seemed as if she was constantly studying, but when we were together, life was good. My career eventually kept me very busy. I was a public school teacher in a prestigious district where I taught second grade. With my math background, I could have taught high school, and even gone on to an advanced degree and become a college professor. However, my aspirations were to change my students' lives for the better. My heart told me that the best place to do that was teaching young children. Nancy didn't understand the nature of my vocation, but at first, she accepted it. As I said, we were very happy with her as a medical student and me teaching young children. I was looking forward to someday having children of our own. Eventually, Nancy graduated and interned at the local medical center. I went from seeing her too little to seeing her almost not at all. However, I knew she was working toward a goal. I believed that when her internship was over, we would be truly together. However, soon she was embarked on a residency. Before I knew it, we had been married for 5 years. The time had come to tell Nancy about the egg money, but something held me back. I knew I should tell her, but something held me silent. Finally, I admitted to myself that I didn't trust my wife. She was ambitious and too conscious of her social position. I told myself that in time she would mature, and then I could disclose the egg money. Nancy completed her residency and began her career as a surgeon. I thought we would see each other more, but we didn't. However, Nancy's income vastly increased, and soon she was talking about buying a house. I saw this as a good sign that we would be planning a family. Nancy insisted on buying an expensive house in a fashionable neighborhood that she felt matched her new inflated status. "I'm a surgeon, and this is a successful doctor's house," she told me. The house was the classic McMansion, using too much of a small lot and having an interior design that created a lot of useless space. It had a freestanding 3-car garage that Nancy soon filled with an expensive luxury car and a 4-wheel drive all-terrain vehicle. Our little Subaru that I drove was squeezed into the 3rd space. My suggestion that it was now time to consider starting a family was brushed aside. "We just now have our freedom. Children would tie us down. It's time to enjoy our success, she argued. However, we didn't enjoy our freedom. Or at least, I didn't. I spent many lonely nights and weekends in a large, empty house. We lived in a picture postcard neighborhood where the houses were close, but the people were distant. Allegedly, Nancy was off working both nights and weekends. But I began to suspect that it wasn't all work. Out of boredom, I began volunteering weekends at the local daycare and spending my nights in chat rooms on the internet. It was this last activity that led to a strange development. I generally frequented education-orientated groups where we discussed the current trends in education. One evening, a newbie showed up with a peculiar and highly specific question. "This is Hermes," he wrote. "Does anyone know about an educational program called Doctrina? I'd be interested in your thoughts." The board I was on that night was primarily school administrators. They had heard of the educational software he was mentioning. It was a complicated package of computer-assisted programs for elementary school children that was getting a lot of hype just then in the press. Most of the administrators on the board that night were highly enthusiastic. However, my school just happened to be a test site, and I knew the software was useless. "Technology," I commented, "is all very well, but Doctrina would require a large investment in hardware for nearly all schools. Even the best-funded schools have only a computer or two per classroom in the lower grades. Using this software would require a large investment for a modest gain. That rules out public schools and all but a few elite private schools. However, if you are spending a small fortune sending your child to private school, do you want your child taught by a machine?" "What about homeschooling?" Hermes queried. I had thoughts on that, and soon he suggested that we have a private chat. We discussed Doctrina's chances of success in the educational field for the next 4 hours. It was after 2 in the morning when we signed off. However, my wife still wasn't home. She came in around 3 and stumbled into our bedroom. I pretended to be asleep. She had clearly been drinking and therefore had not been working. She threw her clothes into the hamper and headed to the master bath of the bedroom. Before I left for work the following day, I checked the hamper. Nancy was still asleep. Allegedly, she worked the 4 to midnight shift. But I had my doubts. The clothes in the hamper were not what you wear to work, particularly the fancy underwear that was stained with evidence of intimacy. Whatever faith I had in my wife was lost. For the next 2 weeks, I went around in a kind of fog, wondering what had become of my life and trying to determine a course ahead. What had gone wrong? Was it something I did or didn't do? Was it one man or many? Should I confront her? Should we try counseling? There were so many questions, but no easy answers. Little Jeffrey Anderson snapped me out of it. He was a bright young boy, but he was struggling. He had definite reading problems and was having trouble with pronunciation. I suspected a learning disability. We didn't have the facilities to adequately test him at our school. We tested, but it was strictly routine. I knew his parents had resources. I informed them of what I suspected at the parent-teacher meeting and recommended several good sources to assist them. Sure enough, Jeffrey had a problem and needed extra help to overcome it. Helping Jeffrey would take my mind off my marital issues. At the end of the evaluation and intervention meeting, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson thanked me. Mrs. Anderson hugged me and said, "You're a wonderful man. Your wife is a very fortunate woman, although she doesn't seem to know it." Mrs. Anderson was a nursing supervisor at my wife's hospital, and her husband was a prominent attorney. Jack Anderson then shook my hand and said, "If there is ever anything you need, Silas, please don't hesitate to ask." I left feeling like a giant. I was at the top of my profession. That's when I got a cryptic email from Hermes telling me to log on to the discussion board late that evening for a private chat. My next email was from my wife telling me she would be late again that night. I logged on to the message board at about 11 p.m. Hermes was there waiting for me. "Hey, Teach," he began. "I sure owe you. That Doctrina deal tanked. You saved me a bundle. I'm glad." But is that what you do? Invest? Yeah, I started as a day trader with some family money, but I nearly lost it all. However, I met this fellow who runs a fund that invests in startups. I've been investing with him for about 3 years now. He doesn't always hit, but when he does, it's a good payday. He was pushing this doctrina until I clued him in. He's grateful for the aid you gave us. Well, glad to help, I replied. Look, my friend and I discussed it, and well, we have a deal that's a real long shot. If you're interested, I can give you a piece of my buy-in. The minimum buy-in is $500,000. I'll let you have a share of my piece, any amount you want, up to $5,000, he said. Well, I guess I could invest part of the egg money, I typed. Ha, that's good. Egg money. I didn't know this guy, other than talking over a message board, but something was pushing me that night. I was on a high from my success with Jeffrey Anderson, and at a low because I could sense that Mrs. Anderson knew what my wife was up to behind my back. You know, friend, I wrote, I'll come in, but I want a full share. $500,000. Seriously? You're a teacher? Like I said, I have egg money. Eggs? Who knew? But what's this company called? The company's called Odeo, but we're investing in the spin-off. They're calling it Twitter. Yeah, I know, silly name. It was a very silly name, but I guess you know what happened. I was in without any idea what I was into. If Hermes had explained what it was, I certainly would have passed. It was, in my view, a silly idea to go with the silly name. It was to be the first of several silly ideas. Sometimes they tanked, but when they hit, the returns were great. 5 years after buying into Twitter, I was watching my wife from across a ballroom. Things between Nancy and I had gone downhill. We were at a fundraiser and holiday party for the hospital. Everyone was in formal dress except for the teacher. I was in my best blue suit, and I could feel my wife's embarrassment. For her part, she was hanging on the arm of a young surgeon, her latest lover. Soon the dancing would begin, and she would be in his arms dancing too close to be respectable. I should have cared, but divorce was definitely in the cards. The trouble was that I was far too wealthy at the moment. I was wealthier than any man had a right to be. I had concealed this wealth, but I could not see how it would not come out in a divorce and disrupt my life. It was a strange set of circumstances that had brought me to this place in my life. I had been secretly using the egg money to do good, but exercising great care to avoid disclosing my possession of that money. However, fate was not yet through with the egg money, or me. Mr. Stevenson, a woman said, taking hold of my arm. I turned from watching my wife to find Mrs. Anderson at my side. Oh, hello, Mary, I said. I should have known you would be here. Congratulations on being named head of nursing. Thank you, and if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to introduce you to several people. She led me to a small group. You know my husband, Jack, and this is Leslie Dumont, our hospital president. Her husband, Arthur, and Donna. Miller, I said, interrupting her. We're old acquaintances. Mary turned to Donna. Oh, you know Mr. Stevenson? Yes. Silas is a volunteer at the daycare I use. I'm afraid I've imposed on him several times by being late for my pickup. Donna was a short woman with a round figure. Not exactly fat, but with wide hips and voluminous breasts. Like the old drawings of sexy wood nymphs, I thought the first time I saw her. I was entranced by her silky black hair cut short to frame her beautiful round face. She had 2 children enrolled in the daycare center where I volunteered. She was a registered nurse at the hospital, working weekends to avoid night shifts. She had little help at home, since her husband had died 2 years prior. The weekend daycare is very limited and hard to maintain due to reduced demand and significant expense. Our daycare ran 7 days a week due to a grant from a mysterious foundation with an odd name, the Ovum Foundation. It's never an imposition to help out a beautiful woman in need, I said, invoking a laugh from the group and a shy, embarrassed smile from Donna. The lawyer, Jack Anderson, stepped right in, saying, Very well put and obviously true, since it comes from the best educator I know. someone who has committed himself to excellence. Now it was my turn to give an embarrassed blush, but Mary Anderson immediately began explaining to Donna and Mr. and Mrs. Dumont how I had spotted Jeffrey's learning problem and helped fashion an intervention plan for him. "Jeffrey starts middle school next year, and he's top of his class thanks to this man," she said, leaning into me and giving me a hug. Excellence in one's profession is something we all aspire to, but few of us achieve, author Dumont noted. Then Mrs. Dumont added, "However, some let their baser natures guide them." As Leslie Dumont said this, she was looking across the room to where my wife had begun to dance with her new lover. I didn't believe my wife's activities were entirely secret, but it seemed then that they were far more widely known than I had believed. At that moment, Donna said, "I'm going to be forward here and ask this excellent gentleman to dance." That's how I came to first hold Donna Miller in my arms, a woman who from that moment seemed to perfectly fill the space between my arms and the emptiness in my life. I drove Donna home that night, leaving my wife to find her own way back to the house we sometimes shared. Donna lived in a small saltbox house on a side street. She invited me in for coffee. I watched her lovingly check on her children asleep in their beds. Then she paid the young girl who babysat for her, pulling the cash from a small purse in her pocketbook. The little she paid the girl left the purse empty. Once again, my attention was drawn to how often there was a distinction between domestic happiness and financial wealth. We sat in her kitchen drinking coffee until the early hours of the morning. I pushed her to tell me about her life. She told me about her childhood and attending nursing school, and then about meeting her husband and falling in love. She spoke of giving birth to first her son and then her daughter. All this flowed out of her like a spring-flooded river racing to the sea. Then it hit a dam, and she slowly told me of her husband's tragic death. She and the children were in the car with him, traveling to visit his elderly mother when a truck jackknifed and killed him and injured her. Fortunately, the kids were safe in the back, but Jason died, and I was 3 weeks in the hospital. The truck was in some corporate thing that had little insurance. Jason's settlement was soon exhausted on our living expenses that first year. She tried to gloss over the hardship she faced on the death of her husband, but I wouldn't let her. I made her tell me it all, knowing that the telling was relieving the burden of it. "I don't know what I would do without the reduced daycare I was granted by the center where you work," she said. "I wonder how they manage it." "Oh, you know. People like me donate some time, and parents like you help out. Plus, we have benefactors." "Yes, I'm very grateful to you," she said, covering my hand with hers and giving it a squeeze. "And I'm very grateful to that Ovum Foundation. I should write them and tell them how much they have helped me, and how grateful I am." "Oh, I'm sure they know," I replied. "Well, I'd still like to tell them. Could you get their address for me?" she asked. "I'll work on that, but it's very late, and I should be going." "I think you're wrong. In fact, it's very early, but I'll let you go if you promise to come back and tell me all about yourself and not let me do all the talking, as I did last night." I made that promise, and I intended to come back. At home that night, I found my wife waiting for me. She was furious and bent on a fight, but I had no reason to give her what she wanted. "Look, I'm tired, and whatever your problem is, I'm going to bed." "Oh, no, you don't. You can't just leave me without a word at a public affair. How did you expect me to get home?" "I expected your boyfriend to drive you home," I said, giving her a look that I hoped conveyed that I knew about her extramarital involvements. "How dare you make such an accusation?" "As I said, I'm tired, and it's not an accusation but a fact known by most, if not all, of your co-workers. You and, I believe his name is Dr. Anthony Vincent, have been carrying on very publicly for several months. Tonight you were flaunting it in front of your colleagues." "Tony is a friend, and that's all," she replied. "Well, I'm assuming your friend gave you a ride home. If you knew anything, you would know that Tony rides a motorcycle and I wasn't dressed for that. Nancy, can't you understand that I just don't care anymore?" Why? I suppose you have something going with that woman you left with tonight. With that, I turned abruptly. She nearly fell down the stairs, not expecting me to confront her. Donna Miller is no. She's a widow and a mother. The kind of decent woman someone like you can't understand. She wasn't expecting a defense of Donna, and as she grabbed the banister to keep herself from falling, I could see something cross her face, a mixture of fear and loss. But then she regained her anger, and as we reached the top of the stairs, she said, "You hate me because of my success." At the door to our bedroom, I turned on her again, out of curiosity, not anger. "Why would you think I hate you?" I asked. "Because I'm a prominent surgeon and you are an unimportant grade school teacher." I could only shake my head as I entered the bedroom and prepared for bed. Apparently, she thought she had scored a point with her last statement. "All this is mine, you know," she asserted. "The house and everything in it. The Mercedes and the SUV, the money in the bank accounts, and our $41,000 are all from my earnings." But not the money in the egg fund. Not a dollar came from her of the tens of millions that earned more in a week than she earned in a year. Nor could she claim full ownership of the rest of our possessions purchased with the aid of my teaching salary. However, I felt only disappointment that she had placed things before love in our marriage. "Why, Nancy? How can you be so fixated on material things?" I asked. As I said this, I thanked Uncle Ned for his advice. I had kept the egg money my secret because I could not be sure of my bride. I entered the bathroom in the master suite and locked the door behind me. Nancy first tried the door and then yelled through it, "In a divorce, I'll see that you don't keep anything!" Then, thank goodness, she went quiet. She wasn't there when I finished in the bathroom and re-entered the bedroom. I shrugged and went to bed. The day after Thanksgiving, Nancy effectively put a knife into our marriage. We had spent the holiday at her parents', with my Nancy pretending we were the loving couple. When the food was served and her mother finally sat down at the table, the first words out of her mother's mouth, with all the family listening, were, "Silas, when can I expect to see some grandchildren?" "Ask your daughter," I replied. Nancy gave me an angry look and then launched into her standard response about how we had to wait until her career was more established. At the end of this, her mother gave her standard advice that we should not wait too long. The following day, Nancy assured us that we had waited too long. "I'm going away for Christmas break," she informed me. "Where is it you propose we go?" I asked. "Not we. I'm going with a friend." "This is a male friend, I assume." "None of your business," she hissed. "Well, it's not Tony Vincent because I heard he dumped you for a younger model." She became incensed at this and stormed out of the house. I sat for a while and then decided to call a travel agent. "Yes, I can book that trip," the woman informed me. "But I have to warn you that it can come at a steep price over Christmas week, and that's without the park admission and ride fees. Just make the reservation, but hold the final commitment until the lady says yes," I told her. I had been seeing Donna fairly frequently over the past year. I had often taken her and her kids to dinner when she came to pick them up from daycare on the weekends. The children had become familiar with me. There was Daryl, 6, and Cheyenne, 4. Daryl was named after his paternal grandfather, and Cheyenne was named after Donna's mother. Although Donna and I had become close, there was no physical relationship. It wasn't that I was holding back out of some misguided morality. As far as I was concerned, I owed nothing to Nancy or our marriage. But I could sense the conflict within Donna, the good wife still trying to recover from the death of her husband. It was in this vein that I asked Donna and her children to accompany me to Disney World in Florida over Christmas week. I first broached this to Donna out of hearing of the kids. She was immediately reluctant. "Do you think it wise?" she asked. "If you're worried about my wife, don't be. She informed me she'll be vacationing with a friend." "No, that wasn't my concern. I was considering the expense." "Well, don't concern yourself. I have money set aside for just such occasions." When we told the kids, they were thrilled. But it occurred to me that Donna already knew my wife would be no problem. What she knew was something I would have to explore. I did one other thing. I called and hired a private investigative firm, a large firm, and one with the resources to follow my wife on her trip. Again, someone reminded me of the expense, and I assured them it would be no problem. How about I send you a $25,000 deposit and you bill me weekly? With my wife being followed, I prepared for the end of the school term and my vacation. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to Christmas. We flew to Orlando on Christmas Eve. The trip with 2 small children was exhausting. The suite I had booked had 2 large bedrooms, and Donna took one with the children. I slept alone in a king-size bed. The kids woke us early on Christmas Day, raring to go. We spent a day on the rides and wandering the park. However, by late afternoon, we were all worn out. It was a hectic day in the park, but I hoped for fewer crowds for the rest of the trip. Not long after an early dinner, first Cheyenne and then Daryl fell fast asleep. I opened a bottle of wine from room service, and Donna and I settled in on the couch. Donna took a sip of wine and then excused herself. I figured she was tired and heading for bed. Donna returned in a sheer baby doll nightie. I was stunned and barely managed to stutter a, "What the hell?" "Oh, you don't like it?" she teased, holding the hem out from her sides and doing a little twirl. When I first saw her, I thought she looked a bit like a classic intimacy nymph, but seeing her this way, I knew she was the sexiest nymph there ever was. As she came to the end of her little turn, I jumped up and grabbed her. The intimacy that followed cannot be described. There seemed no material end to our passion, and that was because it wasn't just passion. We each knew the other had fallen in love without intimacy. We now advanced to a state of physical intimacy that many aspire to, but few achieve. Exhausted in the early hours of the morning, we lay holding each other, and I asked her, "Why now, Donna?" "Because I love you, and I've wanted you for some time and knew you wanted me. But you respected him and me enough to wait." I knew the him of which she spoke was her dead husband. We slept then, and it was not until almost the last day, sitting at a small cafe drinking overpriced coffee, that I asked her what she knew of my wife's new friend. Her children were playing nearby, and she was watching them and not looking at me while she spoke. "It's Dr. Sherman, and it's a bit of a scandal, I'm afraid." "Not Thomas Sherman, surely. He's the hospital's chief of medicine." "Yes, that Thomas Sherman," she replied. "But he's happily married, and he must be at least 15 years older than Nancy," I argued. "More like 20, and rumor has it that he was just having a fling with a younger woman until his wife caught him with her in bed and threw him out. Now they say he's trying to put a good face on it. However, no one believes he will last long with the hospital." She opened. Then, realizing what she had said about my wife, she turned to me red-faced and apologized. "Don't fret yourself. She's that and more," I admitted. I didn't want to go home, but I knew we had to. We arrived home on New Year's Eve just in time to celebrate the ball drop. I didn't go home that night but stayed at Donna's. My wife returned home the following afternoon, barely an hour after I arrived. She looked well and tanned, clearly from a vacation in the sun. I think her own tan kept her from noticing mine. At any rate, we exchanged no welcome home kiss. The cool atmosphere remained between us until February, when I came home from school to find her sitting in our living room. I knew what her problem was. I had kept up the surveillance on her. The news of the affair between the chief medical officer and the surgeon had reached the hospital trustees, and one of the lovers had to go. They chose the She wanted me to comfort her, but I found that hard to do. She also tried to get back into my good graces. However, as the saying goes, that ship had sailed. In April, my marriage to Nancy came to an abrupt conclusion. I waited for her to get back on her professional feet before I demanded a divorce. Her return to her vocation didn't come easily. The hospitals in our region were aware of her reputation and wanted nothing to do with her. Finally, she found a place at a small hospital that had taken on bariatric weight loss surgery as a specialty to survive in the current healthcare environment. The chief surgeon was a woman, and Nancy was her assistant. I assumed it was a substantial come-down in prestige, but perhaps not in salary. At any rate, things blew up over something on my end. Donna and I had been careful at first to take precautions. When we got back from Florida, Donna went on the pill, or more precisely, a patch of some kind. I am not knowledgeable enough to know what went wrong, but she was pregnant, and I couldn't have been happier. With her working in a hospital, the news quickly got out. I came home one afternoon from school, intent on changing and departing for Donna's residence. I found Nancy waiting for me. "Well, you got your little tart pregnant," she accused. I merely shrugged and said, "Yes, we're very pleased." This set Nancy off, as I knew it would, and she began cursing Donna and me. When she came down off the ceiling, I said as calmly as I could, "This has to be humiliating for you, as your notable slut status is for me. But if you want to mitigate the pain, I suggest you divorce me as quickly as possible." "You bastard! You're not even ashamed." "As far as I'm concerned, I have nothing to be ashamed of," I replied. "I'll claim adultery and name the little mother as your paramour." "No, you won't. You see, I have pictures. I've had you followed since before last Christmas. I'm particularly fond of a set of you and Tom Sherman on a nude beach in St. Martin. If those hit the internet, what little reputation you have left will evaporate." "You wouldn't dare," she said. "Try me," I replied. I left then and headed straight for Jack Anderson's office. He had been expecting me for some time. Seated in his office, he said, "You know she's going to ask for everything." "She can have it all except the egg money, but I want it done quickly, obviously," I said. "She can't reach the egg trust. It's irrevocable, and you took my advice on transferring your financial profits into it slowly over time," Jack told me. "Good, let's get it done." Donna was not so sanguine. "How can you give her everything? You need to fight this. I'll lend you money for the lawyers. I can take a second mortgage on this house. I don't care a fig about my reputation. But I won't let you destitute yourself on my account." I brought a bottle of expensive champagne with me. "Here, let me pour you a glass of this. You will probably need it," I said. She was seated at her kitchen table and rose to stop me. "No!" she demanded. "I'm pregnant and we can't afford it." "It's just one glass," I said, gently easing her into her seat. When I had her seated and a bit of wine in her. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.